Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, for another bonus live episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast here at ASU+GSV in San Diego. We're sitting out on a little patio for this one, which is very nice. Beautiful day in San Diego. But I'm here with Joe from Cursive Technology. We're kind of mutually connected through the Future of Higher Education group. I kind of just raised the flag of, folks who are willing and able to kind of jump in for podcast interviews. It's what I always like, just kind of the collision of different people. People are sort of like open to be kind of talking shop and promoting things and whatever else. So I'm always grateful for folks like yourself to kind of like jump in here. But Joe, if you want to kind of start us off as we always do, just briefly introduce yourself and your background and talk a little bit about what Cursive does.
Sure. Thanks, Dustin. Thank you very much for having me on. It's really a pleasure to, one, to be in San Diego, but also to be connected with you. So I appreciate letting me on your podcast. My name is Joe Thibault. I am a long time in the education space. Originally wanted to be college administrator when I was in higher education master's program at Syracuse University. Ultimately got an education degree from the University of Vermont, and then went right into EdTech, mostly learning management systems, and kind of providing Moodle as a service to a growing number of institutions around the United States. Used that as an entry into what we call the alternative credit market, which is basically like non-colleges offering transfer credits for students to specific colleges through articulation agreements. And I was employee number 5 at Straighterline, which was one of the 4 S's still going, and was a really great experience with progressive leadership roles at Straighterline, working all the way through academic operations. But in that role, I saw kind of all manner of how the sausage is made in higher education or in large-scaled education programs. So we did coordination of services for students. We recruited and trained all of the faculty who did our evaluation and worked with students from tutoring perspective. We built courses with faculty, sourced materials from large publishers or open educational resources, but also then became kind of like kind of deep into the weeds of having a judiciary process, working with academic integrity, working with students to turn those into learning opportunities, and came face-to-face very early with the notion that we actually do not know the students sometimes who are enrolled in our courses. Very early on, became aware of contract cheating and essay mills, and really have made it part of my personal priority and career to see what we can do to make sure that we can assure learning to the individual so that our credits and grades and degree programs are, in a sense, being certified to somebody very specifically. So that's our work at Cursive is, I would say, adjacent to that. We focus on the writing process and the literal definition of authorship to verify and to connect the writing to the writer. So for assessment, for assurance of learning, just making sure that we're doing those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's important stuff, and appreciate you kind of giving the whole origin story of kind of how you came to the work and everything. And I think, there's going to be a couple of conversations that we've had here, and even at a previous event, if folks are following along with all the episodes from South by Southwest EDU about kind of like, transparency with, AI platforms, using AI to increase, kind of integrity or trust, and all these sort of things. So, I think it's just a moment where, AI, sort of like, in air quotes, like, is sort of like forcing the point of the conversation around like sort of kind of interrogating, like, well, how do we know, how can we trust and verify and all that? Because like people, could use it to then be even more bad of actors, in terms of like, the stuff like you mentioned, sort of more historic or kind of classic examples. But then it's like, well, maybe we can also use AI to help with these things, like it's just kind of, an interesting moment for that conversation. And I think just before we kind of get to anything else, there's a big event, a lot of folks kind of from all over K through 12 and higher education, everything else. For you, like coming here, we're kind of early on kind of the first big full day. What brings you to the event? Like for this year, are you hoping to achieve in terms of like, are you attending a lot of sessions? Are you doing a lot of like, meetings or whatever else? I'm always just curious to hear from folks kind of how they're showing up and how they're engaging in the community.
So the answer to that is yes.
All the things.
In a sense that my calendar is like quadruple booked essentially like every 15 minutes, like throughout the 3 days I'll be in San Diego. What brings me, I'm fortunate to be golden ticket holder. So startups for the GSV, if you're interested, is like applying to the GSV 50 and kind of being participant in that can open some doors in terms of like helping early stage startups to get here. And I would encourage all startups to that are interested in the edtech space or that are play in the edtech space to try because it's a great time to come and kind of see the energy and the excitement of what people are working on towards improving educational outcomes or improving transparency or student support services or organizational improvement for higher education or K-12, all of these kind of like all of the edtech providers and all of the edtech opportunities, I think is like interesting to get them in kind of one big room and to hear from the leaders of organizations like AWS or from Google about kind of what they're working on, what they're seeing, and how they're approaching things. It's just it's just always a really great learning experience. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I think it's just that idea too of like learning can happen anywhere and everywhere at this event in terms of like, if you're just sort of like, making line buddies or like, just going to all the booths or going to sessions or going to socials or whatever else. It's like, if you just bring the right mindset, you can be, very open to, conversations and the different collisions of, all the intersecting parts of the whole ecosystem and everything. But yeah, it's like here, I think it's always pretty reliable to have like, those bigger players that are very influential on all the various kind of players within our space, like the the Googles and of the world and all that. But great. Well, we will move on to kind of talk more about your work, kind of what you're seeing day to day with your work at Cursive. So I thought of an interesting way, I guess, to frame this in terms of like, ensuring academic integrity, kind of how that actually like is playing out right now. Like, what is your general mindset when it comes to ensuring this at institutions? And I think in my mind is that idea of like, do we need to add more things on, or do we need to take things away, or like is there kind of a spectrum there of just your point of view of like, because it could be the idea of like we're just going to keep adding in more verifications and logins or whatever else, but it could be that we need to just like take some things away perhaps as well. So curious your general mindset when it comes to how can we work more towards ensuring academic integrity at institutions today.
Lots to unpack there. Yeah. So I would say first and foremost that we should be clear is like we have done a very poor job historically of actually tying the writing asset or the products that students are ultimately submitting to the actual user. And so this idea of cognitive offloading to AI, that seems to be more nuanced and kind of new since 2022. But cognitive offloading to somebody else has existed for decades. And we, in a sense, have been ill-suited to do that. This is why Turnitin was actually kind of created to fight frat files and this idea of collusion. But what they ended up with and what we kind of sold as a solution was originality verification, that you hadn't seen this text before. And it is not answering the question of who actually wrote something.
Right.
But in a sense, what do we do about kind of like AI in education or academic integrity these days? I would say is like things have obviously changed. And I think being clear-eyed and acknowledging that, the old way of doing things is just no longer going to be really beneficial to lean into. But I do think that there's an opportunity to rethink how we're verifying the work that students are doing. And I think what I would say is like, on the one hand, I think that there's a rethinking of the value of the learning management system, which I think is kind of poorly named in a way. Is like a lot of the learning does not actually occur on the learning management system. When it comes to writing, almost no writing happens on the learning management system. But we've relied on these as kind of like a beefed up grade books for years to essentially be our record of like, how do we know that students have learned something? It's like they did all these assignments and they handed them in, and we have a verification of the grade that lives here. That is probably not sufficient moving forward when we have tools like agentic AI or agentic browsers that can essentially click through these mapped out outcomes-driven tests and quizzes and essays that need to be uploaded or pasted in. When those are, in a sense, is when the cognitive offloading can occur with just a prompt, we have to rethink of kind of like the user term is like the surface area of the LMS. Where are we actually getting the assurance of learning and how do we help students to do that? And I think one thing I probably mentioned more than once in the course of this conversation is that I do think that there's a really big opportunity for us to center the assurance of learning to the student rather than to the course. And I don't know that there are not a lot of tools out there that really take a more, I don't want to call it like personalized education. It's more of like, how do we empower the student to be kind of like the agent of their own assurance of learning? I think there's a really keen, like a clear opportunity here to do that is to serve the students as they're working through it directly, rather than make it a compulsion-based model where it's like, if you have to go specifically to this place at this time, do this thing, and we're going to surveil you while we're doing that, and that will be your assurance of learning, is like how can we build in the flexibility where the student gets to work where they feel most comfortable working, to do it at the time that they want to do it on the platform that they want to, or use the tools that they want to in order to prove that? I would think it's like that becomes more of a workflow management tool, but in a sense, it is a learning management system in a much more true sense. And I think I think that there's a lot of opportunity to reframe things that way.
Yeah, because I think just the way I could have positioned that question, because I think it's obviously, you're kind of really getting into kind of the nuance of everything and like the context, but like there's people saying, well, I guess we just got to go back to blue books or something. Yeah, like that idea of like, test proctors, and you're doing it in person, we're just watching you and that sort of thing. But then other people, it's like, well, we don't need to change the assignments. We just have to like layer on all this other stuff, or maybe, just kind of like the surface area, the environment that it's happening in. And it's like, I guess on one hand, I think, it's just sort of like, oh, okay, we're going to go all back to blue books. It's like that. My gut doesn't feel right, but like get the sort of like analog tendency or sort of desire is like just kind of harken back to what we quote unquote knew worked back in the day or whatever. But I think it is at least, an opportunity to rethink like how are we assessing learning? How are we, like kind of envisioning what our learning management system can be or whatever else. And then, I'm starting to see some really cool examples of the ways that you can like allow AI to be used in the completion of different assignments or different things. And you can kind of track like, how did you get there, show your work and like that sort of thing. But I think it's just this like catalyst, now that we're like having these conversations, to just think through like on a more intentional level, like on a, assignment per assignment basis within even the same course of like, well, we're going to do this one this way. Like you can use AI for this, you can not use it for that, or you can use it in this way. And, you're going to show me your work of how you got there. And, at least even have that as like a point of feedback of like, wow, it took you like 25 prompts to get to the answer. Like you probably could have been a little bit more clear and efficient, like those sort of things. Like that would be helpful feedback in addition to like, yes, you answered the question correctly in terms of like building an argument, providing good reasoning and whatever. I don't know. So I think there's not maybe like the golden rule, the one only way or, whatever. It is just a kind of continually evolving kind of conversation and practice. And I think, certainly like spaces like this, people are kind of, talking a lot about this, which is great, obviously. But I think it will be that there's going to be a variety of tools, platforms, approaches, and philosophies, like, within each course, within each assignment, within each program or whatever it might be. I guess it's just my impression.
I think you're spot on. And to reuse your point about like blue books, if you are fortunate enough to be able to deliver a class face-to-face and to actually proctor your students and to have a high-stakes assessment and summative assessment in the form of blue books, where you're also going to subject yourself to reading some of probably the worst handwriting that's ever been seen in the history of man. That is one thing. And I would say is like that is a very good way to raise the stakes and to assess students with a surety of learning. But a lot of students these days, the majority are taking at least one, I think it's like 75% of students are taking at least one course online where a blue book is not an opportunity for that. So to replicate something similar in terms of like the level of assessment security sufficient to a blue book, you would need to use testing centers or proctoring or other things like that. We're leveraging webcams, et cetera, right? And those are totally viable ways, and those are very valid ways to do the assessment. But in a sense, it's like those are still very limiting things. And when it comes to writing, I would just point out also is that writing takes a lot of time and effort. And if we're going to try to say that we want to proctor the entirety of writing, I can tell you, I don't want to be on a camera for 10 hours while I'm, struggling with assessment, or I don't want to be scheduling every single one of my times and sessions of writing to go through that process. If I'm doing a dissertation or a research paper, I want to be able to pop in and do it anytime. So, our take is that there is a way to add a layer of verification that's like proctoring, but we don't use a webcam, we use the keyboard. And through biometric data, through the keyboard and the verification of through typing behavior, I can be assured that it is the right user throughout the process without ever having to put them on camera. So it comes as like, if I can do something that's less invasive, that's more acceptable to the student, could I achieve something to the level of a Blue Book so that I meet the requirements of the institution, the expectations of the faculty, and also the kind of the flexibility that students are seeking in order to actually put the time and effort and the thought into a well-crafted take-home examination or essay or paper or research that I think we want to see.
Yeah, and I guess I appreciate, because I guess something I'm kind of like, reflecting on specifically is, just with you kind of putting that emphasis on, writing and the typing and verifying all that. It's just the idea of like, it does with like the Blue Book stuff or whatever, like that some people's perspective was almost to like give up on that, like it's just like, well, I guess we can't really, AI could just write the whole thing and whatever else, like we got to like figure out a different way. And it's like, yes, maybe, but like folks like yourself are, kind of putting their, brains towards that problem to, like I said, like there's value in that as an assessment type for, certain things, and just sort of like this being a opportunity, to kind of rethink, how we're kind of operating things, and assessing learning inside the classroom. So yeah, definitely, we'll have ways to obviously connect with you and look more into your work in the episode description. But as we're winding down, what do you see on the horizon for your work? Like, what are the kind of things that maybe you're working on or anticipating, like things that might be changing, or what are you kind of building towards, let's say the next couple of years?
Yeah, so we right now we have a native implementation to Moodle Learning Management System, which is the largest by user volume in the world, and we are a certified partner with Moodle HQ. But we also in late February, launched a browser extension for Chrome that, in a sense, it kind of shifts the dynamic back to that being more student-centered. So we have pilots right now at Catholic International University and one with University of Maryland in the fall, where we're providing these tools directly to students. It works locally, it's securely. This sensitive data never leaves the student's computer, but it empowers the student to add that attestation and the verification of their work to the submission process. It doesn't require any integration to any learning management system. It is simply compatible with the existing infrastructure that we have set up. So I like it for that in that case. And to compare it to tools like Grammarly's authorship is that everything stays locally rather than going up to the cloud for the student to kind of share. So the student is in complete control of their own privacy, of their own data, of this verification process, but they see the verification prior to the submission process, which is going to drive behavior and expectations from the faculty towards, I think and hope, what we expect from students to raise the bar. And this is not to say that I don't think that students should be using AI. I would say our product is agnostic to the use of AI. It is up to the faculty to set the expectations, to set the rules and requirements for student submissions. I just want to help the student to bring transparency to that process so that they can be confident in making that submission, and that teachers immediately will have signals of trust in order to assure the learning that we're ascribing to, the grades, the credits, the ultimate degree transfer, that we're like saying that this person, they know it, they earned it. We have assured that they are, a graduate of this program.
Because I think it's even with like you alluding to like Turnitin as, they're evolving with the moment, but they were kind of indicative of, like you said, a sort of a, academic integrity tool and platform, in terms of just like you're submitting a file and it's just looking at that file and seeing if it matches other stuff. The idea that the way that many students interacted with that was just like you do your assignment, you submit it in Canvas or wherever else, and we'll do the checks. So I think it's that idea of like, kind of the impression that I'm getting is that idea that like making it seamless, not making it sort of an onerous kind of thing, whatever. Like that's going to be a big part of, I think, this wave and this movement that you're sort of like a part of this sort of like writing has a place. It should be here to stay. And we need to sort of like make it as ubiquitous and easy and seamless as possible to have that kind of like transparency and kind of, verified authenticity of writing and things like that. So yeah, I think it's just a cool movement because I feel like I always enjoyed writing and all that. It's like, I don't want to see it go away. Final question. Well, we're asking this to everybody. Advice that you would give to other higher ed leaders navigating this moment.
I think institutions and higher education leaders today have a clear opportunity to realign towards what actually matters to us Because in a sense, is like before, I think we said what matters to us is like the examination, the paper, the dissertation, like these things, these assets that a student is producing for us and uploading to our learning management system. And clearly, those days are over. So what do we care about? And I would posit that what I care about as a future employer is that the person who I'm hiring that I can trust, that the things on their resume, that the degree and the things that stand behind that, the value of that degree, that they were the participant and they were the student, because that's what matters more. Is that even if they're leveraging AI, I care more about the brain of this particular individual and that they have the skills and the knowledge and the experience to do this. It is less meaningful to me if the institution is not verifying that that person is the right person who's supposed to be enrolled. For all things that matter first is like, how it's done, that's very important. What's created, that's very important. But who created it? Nothing else matters if we're not answering that question.
Yeah. And again, for me, it's like, and doing that in as least intrusive of a way possible. Because you have, again, like, because I think a lot about this in terms of just sort of like cybersecurity in higher ed or whatever, like you can obviously put like multiple, sort of like crazy doors and locks and, the vault. Right. Like, so it's the idea of like, you would hope that you could have that be easily verified without having to jump through a bunch of hoops and it's seamless and all that. And like, so it's exciting to see that I think is like, on the horizon, being worked on, very achievable and, happening now with folks like yourself. And like I said, we'll have ways to connect with you and Cursive in the episode description. But thanks so much for taking some time to talk with me.
Dustin, it's great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.